What if you woke up 60,000 years ago, surrounded not by wild animals, but by another kind of human? What if you had to survive a single day in the world of the Neanderthals? Imagine opening your eyes to a sky unmarked by contrails, to air so cold it burns your lungs, to silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat echoing in your chest. You're lying on packed earth inside a shallow cave, and the smell hits you first. Smoke, animal fat, something raw and earthy you can't quite name. Your body aches from the cold, your skin prickles with awareness, and then you see them. Figures moving in the half-light, broad shoulders, heavy brows, eyes that catch the firelight and hold it. They're watching you, not with curiosity, not with welcome, with something else entirely, a kind of patient, measuring silence that makes your throat tighten. They look human, almost. But something in the way they move, the way they breathe, the way they simply exist in this frozen world tells you that you are not among your own kind. Not really. You have stumbled into the world of the Neanderthals. And the question isn't whether you'll survive the Ice Age landscape, the predators, or the brutal cold. The question is whether you'll survive them. Because these weren't the brutish cavemen of old cartoons and museum dioramas. They were something far more complex, far more capable, and far more alien than we ever imagined. They buried their dead with flowers. They cared for the injured and the old. They created art, wore jewellery, and may have spoken in voices we would recognise as language. But they also lived by codes we no longer understand, in a world that demanded a kind of strength and silence we've long since forgotten. They were human, yes, but they were a different kind of human. And that difference might be the very thing that would break you before the sun set on your first day among them. So let's walk into that world together. Let's imagine what it would truly mean to spend 24 hours inside a Neanderthal family. Not as an observer behind glass, but as a stranger in their midst. Vulnerable, exposed, and utterly out of place. Let's see if you could last even a single day in the company of the people who once ruled Ice Age Europe, and who still live on, in fragments, inside us all. The first thing you need to understand is where you are. Not just geographically, but temporally. Locked into a version of Earth so different from our own that it might as well be another planet. This is Europe during the last glacial period, somewhere between 100,000 and 40,000 years ago, when ice sheets stretched down from the Arctic like frozen fingers, reshaping the land into something harsh and unforgiving. The climate swings wildly. Summers are brief and cool. Winters are long, dark, and merciless. The landscape is a patchwork of tundra, steppe, and scattered forests of pine and birch, broken by rivers that freeze solid for months at a time. This is the world the Neanderthals called home. Not for a few generations, but for hundreds of thousands of years. They evolved here, adapted here, thrived here in conditions that would kill most modern humans within days. Their bodies were built for this cold. Short, stocky, powerfully muscled, with barrel chests that could process oxygen more efficiently in thin, frigid air. Their noses were broad and protruding, designed to warm and humidify the icy breath before it reached their lungs. Their bones were thicker, denser, capable of withstanding impacts and stresses that would shatter ours. Even their brains were slightly larger than ours, though shaped differently, with more mass devoted to vision and body control, less to the abstract social reasoning that defines us. They weren't a failed experiment. They were a successful one, so successful that they outlasted countless other species, survived climate shifts that erased entire ecosystems, and spread across a territory stretching from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the Altai mountains of Siberia. For 250,000 years, they were the dominant human species in Europe and Western Asia. And then, around 40,000 years ago, we arrived. Homo sapiens, the other humans, the ones who would eventually inherit the Earth. But that's a story for later. Right now, you're not thinking about extinction or evolution. You're thinking about survival. Because the Neanderthals you've woken up among don't know you're from the future. They don't know you're a different species, All they know is that you're here, in their territory, and you don't belong. The cave you're in is shallow, barely more than an overhang carved into a limestone cliff by wind and water over millennia. It faces south, positioned to catch whatever weak sunlight filters through the clouds. The floor is layered with ash, bone fragments, and the compressed remains of countless fires. The walls are blackened with soot. Near the entrance, someone has arranged flat stones into a rough circle, a hearth, still warm from the night's fire. Beyond the cave mouth, the world is grey and white, a rolling expanse of grassland dotted with patches of snow and the dark shapes of distant hills. You sit up slowly, and every eye in the cave turns toward you. There are 7 of them, 3 adult males, 2 adult females, and 2 children, a boy who looks about 10 and a girl who might be 6 or 7, though it's hard to tell. Their faces are broad and flat, with prominent brow ridges that cast their eyes into shadow. Their skin is pale, almost ghostly in the dim light, and their hair is thick and dark, hanging loose or tied back with strips of leather. They're dressed in furs, reindeer, bison, something shaggy and heavy, stitched together with sinew and draped over their bodies in layers. Their hands are massive, scarred and calloused. Their feet are wrapped in hide and stuffed with dried grass for insulation. No one speaks. They just watch. And in that silence, you realize something that makes your stomach drop. You have no idea how to communicate with them. You open your mouth and the words that come out sound thin and strange in the cold air. One of the males tilts his head slightly, and you see something flicker in his expression. Not confusion exactly, but a kind of patient assessment, as if he's trying to decide whether you're a threat, a curiosity, or simply irrelevant. You try again, gesturing to yourself, then to them, then to the fire. Nothing. The children stare at you with wide, unblinking eyes. One of the females makes a low sound in her throat, something between a hum and a growl, and the others shift slightly, adjusting their positions in a way that feels coordinated, deliberate. You realize they're moving as a unit, responding to signals you can't perceive, and you realize something else. You're completely, utterly alone. Because even if they understand that you're human, even if they recognize you as something close to their own kind, you don't speak their language. You don't know their gestures, their expressions, their codes. You don't know what that low hum meant, or why the male near the entrance just touched his chest twice with his fist, or why the children suddenly looked away when you made eye contact. You're illiterate in a language you didn't even know existed. And in a world where survival depends on cooperation, on understanding the unspoken rules of the group, that illiteracy might be fatal. The Neanderthals almost certainly had language. Not the grunts and gestures of old stereotypes, but something complex and structured, capable of conveying abstract ideas, planning hunts, teaching skills, and passing down knowledge across generations. Their hyoid bones, the small horseshoe-shaped bones in the throat that anchor the muscles used in speech, are virtually identical to ours. Their ear canals were tuned to the same frequencies we use for spoken language, and their FOXP2 gene, which plays a crucial role in language development, shows evidence of the same mutations that enable our own linguistic abilities. But what did their language sound like? How did it work? We'll never know. Language doesn't fossilize. It leaves no trace in the archaeological record. All we have are hints, shadows, the faint echoes of a voice that went silent tens of thousands of years ago. Some researchers believe Neanderthal speech might have been slower, more guttural, shaped by their different vocal anatomy. Others think it might have been supplemented by gestures, by a rich vocabulary of hand signs and body language that we've lost. Still others wonder if their communication was less about words and more about something else, shared understanding, intuition, a kind of collective awareness that didn't require constant verbal negotiation. What we do know is this: if you can't speak their language, you can't function in their world. You can't ask for food, for shelter, for help. You can't explain where you came from or what you need. You can't negotiate, apologize, or plead. You're reduced to mime, to pointing and hoping, to the desperate pantomime of someone drowning in silence. And in a society where every member has a role, where cooperation is the difference between life and death, a person who can't communicate is a person who can't contribute. And a person who can't contribute is a burden. One of the males stands. He's shorter than you, maybe 5.5 feet tall, but he's built like a wrestler. Broad chest, thick arms, legs like tree trunks. His face is weathered and scarred, with a nose that looks like it's been broken more than once. He moves toward you with a kind of rolling gait, and you instinctively lean back. He stops a few feet away, studying you with eyes that are pale grey, almost colourless in the firelight. Then he does something unexpected. He reaches out and touches your shoulder, not roughly, but firmly, with a pressure that feels like a question. You freeze. He waits. And when you don't respond, don't mirror the gesture or make the right sound or do whatever it is he's expecting, he withdraws his hand and turns away. You failed some kind of test. You don't know what it was, but you know you failed it. And as the group returns to their morning routine, stoking the fire, checking tools, murmuring to each other in voices too low to hear, you realize that you're not part of this family. You're not even a guest. You're something else. An anomaly. A problem they haven't yet decided how to solve. The morning unfolds slowly, and you watch, trying to learn, trying to understand. The Neanderthals move with a kind of quiet efficiency that feels almost choreographed. There's no wasted motion, no idle chatter, no unnecessary noise. Everything they do has purpose. One of the females is working near the fire, using a flat stone to grind something. Seeds, maybe, or dried roots. The sound is rhythmic, meditative, a soft scraping that blends with the crackle of burning wood. The other female is sorting through a pile of hides, inspecting them for damage, running her fingers along the seams where sinew holds the pieces together. The children are playing near the cave entrance, but their play is strange, silent, focused, more like practice than fun. The boy is chipping at a piece of flint with a hammerstone, trying to create a sharp edge. The girl is weaving grass into a rough cord, her small fingers moving with surprising dexterity. The males are preparing for something. You can see it in the way they're checking their weapons. Wooden spears with fire-hardened tips, stone blades hafted to wooden handles with pitch and leather bindings. One of them is sharpening a hand axe, striking it carefully with a softer stone to flake off tiny chips and refine the edge. Another is testing the balance of a spear, hefting it, sighting down its length, making minute adjustments to the binding. The third, the one who touched your shoulder, is simply sitting, staring out at the landscape beyond the cave, his expression unreadable. You realize they're going hunting, and you realize something else. You're expected to go with them. The scarred male stands and gestures toward you, then toward the others, then toward the open land beyond the cave. The meaning is clear. You're coming. Not because they want your help, but because leaving you alone in the cave with the females and children isn't an option. You're an unknown. You haven't earned their trust. So you'll be where they can see you, where they can watch you, where they can make sure you're not a threat. You stand, and your legs feel weak. You're not dressed for this. You're wearing whatever you had on when you somehow ended up here. Clothes designed for climate control and comfort, not for survival in sub-zero temperatures. Your shoes are wrong. Your coat is wrong. Everything about you is wrong. But the Neanderthals don't wait. They move toward the cave entrance and you follow, because the alternative is being left behind, and you're not sure what that would mean. The cold hits you like a physical blow. The air is so sharp it makes your eyes water, and your breath comes out in great white plumes that hang in the stillness. The landscape stretches out before you, vast, empty, beautiful in a way that feels almost hostile. The grass is brown and brittle, crunching under your feet. Patches of snow cling to the shadowed hollows. In the distance, you can see a herd of something, reindeer maybe, or horses, dark shapes moving slowly across the plain. Above, the skies are pale, washed-out blue, streaked with high clouds that promise more cold to come. The Neanderthals move in a loose formation, spread out but always aware of each other's positions. They don't talk. They don't need to. They communicate through glances, through subtle shifts in posture, through a vocabulary of gestures so small and quick you almost miss them. A raised hand, a tilt of the head, a brief touch to the chest or shoulder. It's like watching a dance where everyone knows the steps except you. You try to keep up, but it's hard. They move differently than you do, lower to the ground, more stable, with a kind of rolling efficiency that eats up distance without seeming to hurry. Their feet find purchase on ice and stone where yours slip and slide. They navigate the terrain with an ease that speaks of lifetimes spent in this landscape, of bodies and minds shaped by this exact environment. You, meanwhile, are stumbling, breathing hard, already feeling the cold seeping through your inadequate clothes and into your bones. And then you see what they're tracking. Prints in a patch of soft earth near a frozen stream, large cloven hooves, the tracks of something big. Bison, maybe, or aurochs. The males crouch around the prints, studying them with an intensity that feels almost reverent. One of them touches the edge of a track, feeling the texture of the soil, gauging how long ago it was made. Another sniffs the air, head tilted, nostrils flaring. The third, the scarred one, simply looks, his eyes moving across the landscape in a pattern you can't follow, reading signs you can't see. They rise as one and change direction, moving faster now, following the trail with a confidence that borders on certainty. You hurry after them, your heart pounding, your breath coming in ragged gasps. You're not built for this. Your body is adapted for endurance running on flat ground, for persistence hunting in the heat of the African savanna, not for this kind of explosive, terrain-crossing pursuit in freezing temperatures. Your muscles are burning, your lungs are screaming, and the Neanderthals haven't even broken a sweat. Because this is what they were made for. This is their world, their element, the environment that shaped every aspect of their biology and behavior. They're not just surviving here, they're thriving. And you, for all your modern advantages, for all your abstract intelligence and technological prowess, are hopelessly, pathetically out of your depth. The hunt continues for hours. The Neanderthals move with a patience that feels inhuman, tracking the herd across miles of frozen ground, waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity. They don't rush, they don't force it. They simply follow, silent and relentless, until finally in a narrow valley between two hills they find what they're looking for. A bison. Hold, judging by the grey in its coat and the way it moves, stiff, slow, separated from the herd. It's grazing near a stand of scrubby bushes, unaware of the danger closing in around it. The Neanderthals spread out, moving into position with a coordination that speaks of countless hunts, countless kills, a strategy refined over generations. You're left standing on a low rise, watching, useless, as they prepare to do what they've done 1,000 times before. And then it happens. Fast, brutal, efficient. The scarred male moves first, stepping into the open, drawing the bison's attention. The animal snorts, lowers its head, prepares to charge. But before it can, the other two males are there, coming in from the sides, spears raised. The first spear strikes the bison's flank, sinking deep. The animal bellows, a sound that echoes across the valley, and turns, trying to flee. But the second spear is already in the air, and it catches the bison in the shoulder, driving through muscle and into the chest cavity. The animal staggers, blood pouring from the wounds, and the scarred male moves in close, closer than you would ever dare, and drives his spear into the base of the skull, with a precision that speaks of perfect anatomical knowledge. The bison drops. The Neanderthals stand over it, breathing hard, their faces expressionless. And then, without ceremony, without celebration, they begin the work of butchering. You watch from a distance, and what you see is both familiar and alien. They work quickly, efficiently, using stone blades to open the hide, to separate muscle from bone, to extract the organs and the fat and the marrow. Nothing is wasted. The liver is eaten raw, passed from hand to hand, each male taking a bite before offering it to the next. The heart is set aside, wrapped in a piece of hide. The long bones are cracked open with hammer stones, and the rich fatty marrow is scooped out and consumed on the spot. The hide is carefully removed, folded, prepared for transport. Even the stomach contents are examined, sorted, the partially digested plant matter collected for reasons you can only guess at. They know this animal. They know every part of it, every use, every value. This isn't just hunting. It's a relationship, a deep and intimate understanding of the creatures they share this world with. And as you watch them work, their hands red with blood, their faces calm and focused, you realize that you could never do what they're doing. Not just because you lack the skill, but because you lack the knowledge, the connection, the fundamental understanding of what it means to take a life and transform it into survival. When they're finished, they load the meat onto their backs, massive dripping bundles that would buckle your knees, and begin the long walk back to the cave. You follow, empty-handed, exhausted, your feet numb and your fingers aching from the cold. The sun is already sinking toward the horizon, and the temperature is dropping fast. By the time you reach the cave, it's nearly dark, and you're shaking so hard you can barely stand. The females have kept the fire going. The children are huddled near it, wrapped in furs, their faces glowing in the firelight. The males deposit the meat near the hearth, and the females immediately begin the work of processing it, cutting it into strips, hanging some to dry, roasting some over the flames. The smell is overwhelming, rich, fatty, primal. Your stomach clenches with hunger, and you realize you haven't eaten all day. But no one offers you food. The Neanderthals eat together, passing pieces of meat from hand to hand, chewing slowly, their eyes half closed in satisfaction. The children are fed first, then the females, then the males. It's a hierarchy, a structure, an order that everyone understands except you. You sit at the edge of the firelight, watching, waiting, hoping that someone will notice you, will remember that you're there. Finally, the scarred male looks at you. He holds your gaze for a long moment, and then he picks up a small piece of meat, a scrap, really, barely a mouthful, and tosses it in your direction. It lands in the dirt at your feet. The message is clear. You're not part of this family. You're not one of them. But you're not being driven away either. You're being tolerated. For now. You pick up the meat and eat it, and it's the best thing you've ever tasted. Night falls, and the world beyond the cave becomes a place of absolute darkness. There are no streetlights, no distant glow of cities, no comforting hum of electricity. Just blackness and cold, and the sounds of things moving in the dark, the howl of wind, the crack of ice, the distant cry of something that might be a wolf or might be something else entirely. The fire is the only light, the only warmth, the only thing standing between you and the frozen void outside. The Neanderthals settle in for the night, arranging themselves around the hearth in a pattern that feels deliberate. The children sleep between the adults, wrapped in furs, their small bodies pressed close for warmth. The females sleep near the fire, one of them always half awake, tending the flames, adding wood when needed. The males sleep closer to the entrance, positioned to respond to any threat that might come in the night. And you're given a spot at the very edge of the group, far enough from the fire that you can feel the cold creeping in, close enough that you're still within the circle of light. You lie down on the hard ground, pulling your inadequate coat around you, and try to sleep. But sleep doesn't come. The cold is too intense, the ground too hard, the sounds too strange. And more than that, you're aware of being watched. Every time you shift, every time you move, you can feel eyes on you, assessing, measuring, waiting to see what you'll do. Because trust is earned, not given. And you haven't earned it yet. You haven't proven that you're useful, that you're safe, that you're worth the resources it takes to keep you alive. In a world where every calorie matters, where every piece of meat and every scrap of hide could mean the difference between survival and starvation, there's no room for freeloaders. You have to contribute. You have to pull your weight. And so far, all you've done is stumble along behind them, weak and useless and strange. The night stretches on, and you drift in and out of a shallow, restless sleep. You dream of warmth, of soft beds and central heating, of a world where survival doesn't require constant vigilance and brutal efficiency. And when you wake, shivering and aching, the fire has burned down to embers and the cave is filled with the sound of breathing, slow, deep, rhythmic. The Neanderthals sleep like they do everything else, completely, without reservation, their bodies surrendering to rest with a totality you've never experienced. But one of them is awake, the scarred male. He's sitting near the entrance, silhouetted against the faint grey light of pre-dawn, his spear across his knees. He's not looking at you, he's looking out into the darkness, watching for threats you can't see. And you realise that this is what they do. Every night, every moment, they watch, they guard, they protect. Because in this world, letting your guard down means death. You close your eyes and try to sleep again, but the cold won't let you. Your teeth are chattering, your fingers are numb, you're colder than you've ever been in your life, and with a certainty that feels like ice in your chest, that you won't survive another night like this. Not without better clothes, better shelter, better fire. Not without the knowledge and skills that the Neanderthals have spent lifetimes acquiring. And that's when it truly hits you. You wouldn't last 24 hours in this world. Not because of the predators or the cold or the lack of food, but because you don't know how to live here. You don't know how to make fire from scratch, how to tan a hide, how to find water under ice, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. You don't know which plants are edible and which will kill you. You don't know how to track, how to hunt, how to butcher. You don't know how to make tools, how to build shelter, how to survive a blizzard. You don't know any of the 1,000 small skills that make the difference between life and death in the Ice Age. The Neanderthals know all of this. They were born into this knowledge, raised in it, shaped by it. Every member of the group, from the smallest child to the oldest adult, possesses a depth of practical expertise that would take you decades to acquire, if you could acquire it at all. They're not primitive, they're not simple, they're specialists, masters of their environment, perfectly adapted to a world that would kill you in a matter of hours. And that's the first great truth you'd learn, if you somehow found yourself among them. Intelligence isn't one thing, it's not a single scale, with primitive at one end and advanced at the other. It's a spectrum, a collection of different abilities and skills and ways of understanding the world. The Neanderthals might not have built cities or written books or invented the internet, but they survived and thrived in conditions that would annihilate modern civilization. They were intelligent in ways we've forgotten, in ways we can barely imagine. And in their world, by their standards, you would be the primitive one. Dawn comes slowly, a gradual lightening of the sky from black to grey to pale blue. The Neanderthals wake without alarm, without grogginess, simply opening their eyes and rising as if sleep were just another task to be completed. The fire is rebuilt, the morning routine begins, and you're left to figure out your place in it all. You try to help, you really do. You approach the female who's working near the fire, and you gesture toward the pile of wood, offering to fetch more. She looks at you, and for a moment you think she's going to accept. But then she makes a small sound, not quite a word, more like a grunt, and shakes her head. She doesn't want your help. Or maybe she doesn't trust you to do it right. Either way, the message is clear: stay out of the way. You try again with one of the males, offering to help sharpen a tool, to carry something, to do anything that might prove your worth. But he just stares at you, his expression unreadable, and then turns away. You're not part of the system. You're not integrated into the flow of their daily life. You're an outsider, and every attempt you make to join in just highlights how little you understand about how things work here. The children, though, the children are curious. The boy approaches you while the adults are busy, and he holds out the piece of flint he's been working on. It's rough, unfinished, but you can see the shape of a blade emerging from the stone. He makes a gesture, striking one stone against another, and looks at you expectantly. He wants you to try. He wants to see if you can do what he's learning to do. You take the stones, and you try. You strike them together, and nothing happens. You try again, harder, and a chip flies off, but it's wrong, too big, ruining the shape. The boy makes a sound that might be laughter, and he takes the stones back, showing you the correct angle, the correct force, the way to read the stone and find the natural fracture lines. He's maybe 10 years old, and he's teaching you something that humans have known for hundreds of thousands of years, something so fundamental to survival that it's almost instinctive for him, and you can't do it. The girl comes over too, and she shows you the cord she's been weaving. It's strong, flexible, made from grass and plant fibers twisted together with a technique that looks simple but requires a kind of manual dexterity you don't possess. She tries to teach you, guiding your fingers, showing you the motion. But your hands are clumsy, your fingers too cold and stiff to manage the delicate work. The cord falls apart and the girl sighs, a very human sound of disappointment, and takes it back to fix it herself. You're failing at tasks that children can do, and the adults are watching. They're always watching, assessing, judging. And you can see the question forming in their eyes. What use are you? What can you contribute? Why should they share their food, their fire, their shelter with someone who can't even perform the most basic tasks of survival? In a modern context, your value would be obvious. You have knowledge they don't. Science, history, technology, abstract reasoning. You could teach them things, explain things, offer insights that might change their world. But here now, in this frozen landscape where survival is measured in calories and warmth and the sharpness of a blade, none of that matters. Your knowledge is useless. Your skills are irrelevant. You're not smarter than them. You're just different. And different, in a world where conformity and cooperation are essential, is dangerous. The day wears on, and you begin to understand the rhythm of Neanderthal life. It's not chaotic or random. It's structured, purposeful, built around the demands of survival in a harsh environment. The mornings are for maintenance, repairing tools, processing hides, tending the fire, preparing food. The afternoons are for gathering. The females and children venture out to collect firewood, to dig for roots, to search for anything edible in the frozen landscape. The males scout, hunt, patrol the territory, watching for threats and opportunities. The evenings are for eating, for rest, for the quiet work of preparing for the next day. And through it all, there's a constant undercurrent of communication. Not words exactly, but something deeper. Glances, touches, small sounds, a vocabulary of gesture and expression that conveys meaning without language. You watch a female touch a male's arm, and he immediately shifts his attention to where she's looking. You see a child make a small hand sign, and an adult responds with a nod. You notice the way they position themselves relative to each other, the way they move in coordination, the way they seem to know what each other is thinking without speaking. It's a kind of collective intelligence, a shared awareness that goes beyond individual minds, and you're not part of it. You're isolated, locked inside your own head, unable to access the network of understanding that binds the group together. It's like being deaf in a world of music, blind in a world of colour. You can see them communicating, but you can't participate. You can't join in. You're alone in a crowd, and that loneliness is more profound than any physical discomfort. Because humans are social creatures. We need connection, belonging, the sense that we're part of something larger than ourselves. And the Neanderthals, for all their differences, were social too. They lived in small, tight-knit groups where every member knew every other member intimately. They cooperated, shared, cared for each other in ways that speak of deep emotional bonds. They weren't solitary hunters or lone wolves. They were families, communities, tribes. But you're not part of their tribe. And without that belonging, without that connection, you're not fully human. At least not in the way they understand humanity. You're something else. Something outside. Something that doesn't quite fit. The afternoon brings a new challenge. The females are preparing to go out gathering, and they gesture for you to come along. Not because they want your company, but because, again, leaving you alone isn't an option. You're still an unknown quantity, still untrusted, still under observation. You follow them out of the cave along with the children, and you quickly realize that gathering is just as demanding as hunting, maybe more so. The females move across the landscape with purpose, their eyes scanning the ground, the bushes, the trees, looking for things you can't see. They stop at a patch of withered grass and begin digging with sharpened sticks, pulling up roots that look like nothing special, but which they collect carefully in hide bags. They strip bark from certain trees, peel back layers to reveal the soft inner cambium, which they eat raw or save for later. They find frozen berries clinging to bare branches, nuts cached by squirrels, the dried seed heads of plants you don't recognize. It's a kind of knowledge that's almost magical in its depth and specificity. They know every plant, every tree, every potential food source in this landscape. They know what's edible and what's poisonous, what's nutritious and what's just filler, what can be eaten raw and what needs to be cooked. They know where to look, when to look, how to process what they find. And they do it all without hesitation, without doubt, with a confidence born of lifetimes of experience. You try to help, but you don't know what you're looking for. You pull up a root that looks similar to the ones they're collecting, and one of the females immediately takes it from you and throws it away. Wrong plant. Poisonous, maybe, or just useless. You reach for a berry, and a hand stops you. Not roughly, but firmly. Not that one. You're a liability, a danger to yourself, someone who needs to be watched and corrected constantly. The children, meanwhile, are learning. The girl follows her mother closely, watching everything she does, asking questions in that wordless way they have, pointing, touching, waiting for confirmation or correction. The boy is practicing with his digging stick, trying to mimic the efficient, powerful strokes the adults use. They're being educated, not through formal instruction, but through observation and participation, through the slow accumulation of knowledge that will one day make them as competent as their parents. And you realize that this is how the Neanderthals passed down their culture, their skills, their understanding of the world. Not through writing or schools or formal teaching, but through demonstration and practice, through the intimate daily contact between generations. Every child grew up watching their parents work, helping with tasks, gradually taking on more responsibility until they became full members of the group. It was a system that worked for hundreds of thousands of years, preserving knowledge across countless generations, adapting to changing environments while maintaining the core skills necessary for survival. But it was also a system that left no room for outsiders. If you weren't raised in it, if you didn't learn these skills from childhood, you couldn't just pick them up. The knowledge was too deep, too complex, too embedded in the fabric of daily life. You could spend years among the Neanderthals and still be incompetent, still be dependent, still be a burden. The gathering continues for hours, and by the time you return to the cave, your feet are blistered, your hands are raw, and you're exhausted in a way that goes beyond physical tiredness. It's a mental exhaustion. The strain of constant vigilance, constant failure, constant awareness of your own inadequacy. You've contributed nothing. You've learned almost nothing. you're no closer to being accepted than you were this morning. The evening meal is prepared, a mix of roasted meat and the roots and plants gathered during the day, cooked together in a way that creates something surprisingly complex and flavourful. The Neanderthals eat with obvious pleasure, and again you're given a small portion, barely enough to satisfy your hunger. You eat it slowly, savouring every bite, knowing that it might be all you get. And as you sit there, watching the firelight play across their faces, you begin to see them differently. Not as primitives or cavemen, but as people. Complex, intelligent, emotional people with their own culture, their own values, their own way of being in the world. They laugh, a low rumbling sound that seems to come from deep in their chests. They touch each other gently, affectionately, grooming each other's hair, checking each other for injuries, offering comfort in small, wordless ways. The children play, wrestling near the fire, their movements careful and controlled, never getting too rough, always aware of the adults watching. There's a tenderness here, a warmth that contradicts every stereotype you've ever heard about Neanderthals. They're not brutal or savage. They're not emotionless or simple. They're a family, taking care of each other, surviving together in a world that demands everything they have. And for a moment, you feel a pang of something that might be envy, or longing, or grief for something you've never had and never will. That kind of deep, unquestioning belonging. That sense of being part of a group where everyone knows their place, and everyone is valued for what they contribute. But you're not part of this group, and as the fire burns down and the cave grows dark, you're reminded once again that you're an outsider, tolerated but not accepted, alive but not truly living. You curl up in your spot at the edge of the firelight, shivering, hungry, alone, and you wonder how much longer you can survive like this. The second night is worse than the first. The cold seems to penetrate deeper, settling into your bones, making every breath painful. You can't stop shaking. Your teeth chatter so hard you're afraid they'll crack. And the Neanderthals, wrapped in their furs, sleeping peacefully in the warmth of the fire, seem impossibly distant, impossibly comfortable, impossibly adapted to this frozen hell. You don't sleep. You can't. You just lie there, counting the hours, waiting for dawn, wondering if you'll make it through the night. And somewhere in the darkest hours, when the fire has burned down to almost nothing, and the cave is filled with shadows, you hear something that makes your blood freeze. Footsteps. Outside the cave, heavy, deliberate, moving slowly across the frozen ground. The Neanderthals hear it too. They're awake instantly, silently, moving into defensive positions without a word. The males grab their spears, the females gather the children close. Everyone is tense, alert, ready for whatever is coming. The footsteps stop just outside the cave entrance. There's a long moment of silence, and then a sound, low, guttural, something between a growl and a cough. Not human, not quite animal either. Something else. The scarred male moves to the entrance, spear raised, and he makes a sound back. A challenge, a warning, a declaration of territory. The thing outside responds, and you hear it moving away, slowly, reluctantly, its footsteps fading into the distance. The Neanderthals don't relax. They stay alert, watching, listening, for what feels like hours, and you realize that this is normal for them. This is just another night in the Ice Age, where threats are constant and survival is never guaranteed. They live with a level of danger that would paralyze most modern humans, and they do it without fear, without panic, with a calm competence that speaks of deep familiarity with violence and death. Eventually the tension eases. The males return to their positions. The females settle the children back to sleep. The fire is rebuilt, and warmth slowly returns to the cave. But you can't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the awareness that you're living in a world where you're not at the top of the food chain, where things hunt in the dark, where safety is an illusion, and survival is a constant struggle. And you realize something else. The Neanderthals protected you. They didn't have to. They could have let whatever was outside come in, let it take you, eliminate the burden you represent, but they didn't. They defended the cave, defended the group, and by extension defended you. Not because they like you or trust you, but because that's what they do. They protect their own. And even though you're not really one of them, even though you're still an outsider, you're inside the cave, inside the circle of firelight, and that means something. It's a small thing, maybe. But in this world, small things matter. Small acts of protection, small gestures of inclusion, small moments of shared humanity. These are the things that make the difference between life and death, between isolation and belonging, between being alone and being part of something larger. The third day begins, and you're barely functional. You haven't slept in 2 nights. You're cold, hungry, exhausted, and increasingly aware that you're not going to make it much longer. Your body is shutting down, unable to cope with the demands of this environment. Your mind is foggy, slow, struggling to process even simple information. You're reaching the limits of what a modern human can endure without the tools and knowledge necessary for survival. The Neanderthals, meanwhile, are as strong and capable as ever. They move through their morning routine with the same efficiency, the same purpose, the same quiet competence. And you realize that this is the fundamental difference between you and them. They're built for this. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, culturally. Everything about them, their bodies, their skills, their social structures, their ways of thinking, is optimized for survival in this exact environment. They're not struggling. They're not suffering. They're just living the way they've always lived, the way their ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And you're not. You're a visitor from another world, another time, another way of being human. And in their world, by their standards, you're weak, fragile, unsuited for survival. You're a genetic dead end, a failed experiment, a version of humanity that couldn't make it in the Ice Age. But here's the thing, you did make it. Not you personally, but your ancestors. Homo sapiens. The other humans, the ones who came out of Africa and spread across the world, eventually replacing the Neanderthals, becoming the only human species left on Earth. Your ancestors survived the Ice Age, thrived in it, adapted to it in their own way. They weren't as strong as the Neanderthals, weren't as cold adapted, weren't as specialized. But they had something else, something that made the difference in the end. What was it? What did your ancestors have that the Neanderthals didn't? The answer isn't simple, and it's not flattering. It wasn't superior intelligence. Neanderthal brains were as large as ours, possibly larger. It wasn't better tools. Neanderthals made sophisticated stone tools, used fire, created art. It wasn't stronger social bonds. Neanderthals cared for their sick and elderly, buried their dead with apparent ritual, lived in tight-knit family groups. The difference might have been something more subtle, more abstract. Homo sapiens seem to have had a greater capacity for symbolic thinking, for abstract representation, for creating and sharing complex ideas across large populations. We made art more frequently, more elaborately. We developed more diverse toolkits, more regional variation, more innovation. We formed larger social networks, trading goods and ideas across vast distances. We were more flexible, more adaptable, more willing to experiment with new ways of doing things. But we were also more aggressive, more expansionist, more willing to compete for resources. When Homo sapiens and Neanderthals encountered each other, the result wasn't peaceful coexistence. It was competition, conflict, and eventually the disappearance of the Neanderthals. Whether through violence, disease, interbreeding, or simple out-competition for resources, the Neanderthals vanished from the archaeological record around 40,000 years ago, leaving only traces, bones, tools, and the fragments of DNA that still live in those of us with European or Asian ancestry. So maybe the reason you wouldn't last 24 hours in a Neanderthal family isn't just because you're weak or unprepared. Maybe it's because you're fundamentally different, shaped by a different evolutionary path, adapted for a different kind of survival. The Neanderthals were specialists, perfectly tuned to their environment. Homo sapiens were generalists, adaptable and innovative, but less robust, less specialised, less perfectly fitted to any one place. And in the end, the generalists won. Not because they were better, but because the world changed, and the specialists couldn't change with it. The climate shifted, the megafauna died out, new diseases spread, and the Neanderthals, for all their strength and skill and deep knowledge of their world, couldn't adapt fast enough. They disappeared, leaving only echoes, only memories, only the faint genetic traces that remind us that they were here, that they were real, that they were human in their own way. But they didn't disappear completely. That's the part of the story that changes everything, that transforms the Neanderthals from a failed branch of the human family tree into something more complex, more intimate, more present. Because the Neanderthals didn't just vanish, they merged with us. They became part of us. And if you have European or Asian ancestry, you carry their legacy in your DNA. The evidence is clear and undeniable. When scientists first sequenced the Neanderthal genome in 2010, they discovered something unexpected. Modern humans outside of Africa carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. That means that at some point, probably multiple points, over thousands of years, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred. They had children together. Those children survived, reproduced, and passed on their mixed heritage to future generations. It wasn't a one-time event. It was a process, a slow blending that took place over millennia as the two species encountered each other across Europe and Asia. Sometimes the encounters might have been peaceful. Trade, cooperation, even something like friendship or love. Sometimes they might have been violent, conflict, capture, coercion. We'll never know the details, never know the individual stories of the people involved. But the genetic evidence tells us that it happened, repeatedly, and that the result was a new kind of human, one that carried genes from both lineages. And those Neanderthal genes aren't just random fragments, meaningless relics of an ancient past. They're functional, active, influencing our biology in ways we're only beginning to understand. Some Neanderthal genes affect our immune systems, helping us fight off certain diseases. Others influence our skin and hair, our tolerance for cold, our ability to process certain nutrients. Still others may affect our brains, our behaviour, even our susceptibility to certain mental health conditions. In other words, the Neanderthals are still here, not as a separate species, not as a distinct population, but as a part of us, woven into the fabric of our DNA, influencing who we are and how we live. Every time you get sick and your immune system fights off an infection, there's a chance that Neanderthal genes are helping you survive. Every time you feel the cold and your body responds by conserving heat, you might be experiencing an adaptation that came from them. Every time you look in the mirror and see the shape of your face, the colour of your hair, the structure of your body, you're seeing the result of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, including the contribution of the Neanderthals. So when you imagine yourself in that cave, shivering and alone, struggling to survive among a Neanderthal family, remember this. You're not as separate from them as you think. You're not a completely different species, not an alien visitor from another world. You're a cousin, a relative, a distant descendant of people who once knew them, lived with them, loved them, and carried their children. The boundary between us and them is blurrier than we ever imagined. The Neanderthals aren't the other, they're part of us, and we're part of them. As your imagined day among the Neanderthals draws to a close, as the sun sets once again and the cold night descends, you find yourself thinking about what it all means. You've spent 24 hours, or tried to, in a world that's both familiar and utterly alien, among people who are both human and something else. You've failed at almost everything you've attempted. You've been cold, hungry, exhausted, and alone. You've been tolerated but not accepted, protected but not embraced, kept alive but not truly welcomed. And yet, you've also witnessed something extraordinary. You've seen a way of life that sustained humans for hundreds of thousands of years, a culture built on deep knowledge and intimate connection with the natural world, a society that valued cooperation, care, and competence above all else. You've seen people who were strong without being cruel, intelligent without being arrogant, human without being like us. The Neanderthals weren't primitive. They weren't simple. They weren't the brutish cavemen of old stereotypes. They were people, complex, capable, emotional people who lived and loved and struggled and survived in a world that demanded everything they had. They made art. They made music, possibly, though we'll never know for sure. They cared for their sick and injured, keeping them alive long past the point where they could contribute to the group's survival. They buried their dead with what appears to be ritual and emotion, placing flowers in graves, arranging bodies in specific positions, suggesting a belief in something beyond the physical world. They were human, just not the same kind of human we are. And that difference, that small but significant divergence in our evolutionary paths, is what makes their story so haunting, so tragic, and so important. Because the Neanderthals remind us that humanity isn't one thing. It's not a single, linear progression from primitive to advanced, from simple to complex, from bad to good. It's a branching tree, a collection of different experiments, different adaptations, different ways of being human. Most of those branches are gone now, extinct, leaving only fossils and fragments. But for a brief moment in evolutionary time, there were multiple kinds of humans walking the earth. Each one adapted to their own environment, each one intelligent and capable in their own way. And we're the only ones left. Not because we were better, but because we were different in ways that happened to matter when the world changed. We were more flexible, more innovative, more willing to spread out and try new things. We were generalists in a world that was becoming less predictable, less stable, less suited to specialists. And so, we survived. And they didn't. But they didn't disappear without a trace. They left us their genes, their legacy, their contribution to what we are today, and they left us their story, a reminder that intelligence and humanity come in many forms, that survival isn't always about being the strongest or the smartest, and that the line between success and extinction can be razor thin, determined by factors beyond anyone's control. So why wouldn't you last 24 hours in a Neanderthal family? Not because they were dangerous or hostile, though they could be both. Not because they were primitive or stupid, because they were neither. You wouldn't last because you're not adapted to their world, not trained in their skills, not integrated into their culture. You're a product of a different time, a different environment, a different way of being human. And in their world, by their standards, you would be the weak one, the incompetent one, the one who needed to be carried. But here's the deeper truth. They wouldn't last 24 hours in your world either. Drop a Neanderthal into modern society, and they'd be just as lost, just as helpless, just as overwhelmed as you were in theirs. They wouldn't know how to navigate traffic, use a computer, read a map, or understand the complex social rules that govern our interactions. They'd be strong, yes, and intelligent, but their strength and intelligence would be suited to a world that no longer exists. They'd be specialists in a world that values generalists, experts in skills that no longer matter. So maybe the real lesson isn't about superiority or inferiority, success or failure, winners or losers. Maybe it's about adaptation, about the fact that every form of intelligence, every way of being human, is suited to a specific context, a specific environment, a specific moment in time. The Neanderthals were perfectly adapted to the Ice Age. We're perfectly adapted to the modern world. Neither is better or worse, just different, shaped by different pressures, different challenges, different paths through the vast landscape of evolutionary possibility. And maybe that's why their story haunts us, because it reminds us that we're not inevitable, not permanent, not guaranteed to survive forever. We're just one more experiment in what it means to be human, one more branch on the tree of life, one more attempt to find a way to live in a changing world. The Neanderthals had their moment, and then it passed. We're having our moment now, and someday, maybe sooner than we think, our moment will pass too. But for now, we're here, and they're here too in a way, in our genes, in our bones, in the shape of our faces and the workings of our immune systems. They're here in the stories we tell about them, in the questions we ask about who they were and what they meant. They're here in the caves they painted, the tools they made, the graves they dug with such care and apparent emotion. They're here in the silence of the archaeological record, in the gaps between the bones and the stones, in the things we'll never know about how they lived and what they thought, and what they felt when they looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the universe. They're here in the cold wind that blows across the steppes of Europe, in the mountains where they hunted, in the caves where they sheltered, in the rivers where they fished and the forests where they gathered. They're here in the land itself, in the very ground we walk on, because this was their home for hundreds of thousands of years, and the earth remembers, and they're here in us, in the DNA that codes for our immune responses, our cold tolerance, our hair texture, our skin tone, in the genes that might influence our behaviour, our thinking, our susceptibility to certain conditions, in the biological legacy that reminds us every day that we're not pure Homo sapiens, not a single unbroken line of descent from Africa to the present. We're hybrids, mixtures, the product of multiple lineages coming together and creating something new. So when you imagine that day among the Neanderthals, when you picture yourself shivering in that cave, struggling to survive, failing at every task, remember this: you're not imagining a completely alien world. You're imagining a part of your own past, a chapter in your own story, a moment when your ancestors met another kind of human and decided, consciously or not, to become one people instead of two. You wouldn't last 24 hours in a Neanderthal family, but your ancestors did. They lasted long enough to learn from them, to live with them, to love them, to create children who carried both lineages forward into the future. They lasted long enough to absorb some of what made the Neanderthals special: their strength, their resilience, their deep adaptation to the cold, and blend it with what made Homo sapiens special: our flexibility, our innovation, our restless drive to explore and experiment and change. And the result is you, a hybrid, a mixture, a living testament to the fact that humanity has never been one thing, one species, one way of being. We're a collection of lineages, a blending of different paths, a synthesis of different adaptations and different ways of surviving in a changing world. The Neanderthals are gone, but they're not forgotten. They live on in our genes, in our stories, in our endless fascination with who they were and what they meant. They live on in the questions we ask about human nature, about intelligence, about what it means to be human in the first place. They live on in the reminder that we're not alone, not unique, not the only way that evolution could have created a thinking, feeling, conscious being. They live on in the silence of the caves where they once lived, in the echoes of footsteps long since faded, in the memory of fires that burned tens of thousands of years ago and have long since turned to ash. They live on in the bones we dig up and study, in the DNA we extract and sequence, in the tools we find and marvel at, wondering at the hands that made them and the minds that conceived them. They live on in the cold wind and the dark nights and the vast empty landscapes of the Ice Age, preserved in our collective memory as a reminder of what we once were, what we might have been, and what we still carry within us. So as you drift towards sleep, as the story fades and the images blur, remember the Neanderthals, remember that they were real, that they were human, that they lived and loved and struggled just as we do. Remember that they're part of us, woven into our DNA, influencing who we are in ways we're only beginning to understand. Remember that humanity is not one thing, but many things, Not one path, but many paths. Not one way of being, but countless ways, each one adapted to its own time and place, each one valid and valuable in its own right. And remember that the story isn't over. We're still here, still evolving, still adapting, still trying to find our way in a changing world. The Neanderthals had their moment, and then it passed. We're having our moment now, and what we do with it, how we use it, what we leave behind for those who come after, that's up to us. The fire burns low, the cave grows dark, the cold settles in, and somewhere in the distance, across the vast expanse of time that separates us from them, you can almost hear it. The sound of footsteps on frozen ground, the crackle of a fire, the low murmur of voices speaking a language we'll never understand. The Neanderthals are gone, but they're still here, still with us, still part of the story of what it means to be human. And that story, like the fire in the cave, burns on. On the fourth day, you wake to find the cave nearly empty. Only the old woman and the smallest child remain, and they're preparing something you haven't seen before. The woman is grinding ochre, red iron oxide, on a flat stone, mixing it with fat rendered from yesterday's kill. The paste she creates is the colour of dried blood, of rust, of earth itself. She looks at you, and for the first time there's something in her eyes that might be recognition. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. You've survived 3 nights. You haven't stolen food or caused trouble. You're still useless, still weak, still strange, but you're here. She gestures to her face, then to the paste, then to you. You don't understand at first. Then she dips her fingers in the mixture and draws a line across her own cheekbone. The mark is deliberate, precise. Not decoration, something else. Something that means something. You hesitate. This feels important in a way you can't articulate. Like you're being offered something, a test maybe, or an invitation. You dip your own fingers in the paste. It's warm, greasy, gritty. You draw a line across your cheek, mirroring hers. She nods once, then returns to her work. And you realise the Neanderthals used ochre. We know this from archaeological sites across Europe and Asia. They mined it, processed it, carried it long distances. They used it on their bodies, on their tools, on their dead. We don't know exactly what it meant to them, whether it was ritual, identity, magic, or something we don't have words for. But it meant something. It mattered enough to invest time and energy in obtaining it, in using it, in passing the knowledge down through generations. They had symbolic thought. They had culture. They had meaning-making systems that went beyond pure survival. And maybe that's what the old woman is telling you. You're marked now. You're seen. You're part of something, even if you don't fully understand what. The others return in the early afternoon, and they're carrying something unexpected. Not meat, but materials. Long, straight branches, bundles of sinew, stones of a particular type. Flint, you think, though you're not certain. The scarred male and another man immediately set to work, and you watch. Transfixed. They're making spears. But not the way you'd make them. Not the way you've seen in museums or documentaries. This is different. More sophisticated. The scarred male selects a piece of flint and begins to work it. His hands move with absolute confidence, striking the stone at precise angles, reading the grain and structure like you might read a book. Flakes fall away, each one deliberate, each one bringing the stone closer to the shape he envisions. Within 20 minutes, he's created a spear point that's symmetrical, sharp and beautiful in its functionality. But here's what stuns you. He doesn't just attach it to the shaft. He creates a socket binding the point with sinew and sealing it with heated birch tar, an adhesive that requires finding the right bark, heating it to exactly the right temperature, and applying it before it cools. This isn't simple technology. This is chemistry, engineering. multi-step planning that requires holding a complex sequence of actions in mind, understanding cause and effect across time, and having the patience to execute each step perfectly. The Neanderthals were master craftspeople. Their tools weren't crude, they were often more sophisticated than those of early modern humans. They understood materials at an intuitive level that took us thousands of years to match. They could work stone, wood, bone, and hide, with a precision that required not just skill, but genuine intelligence. And yet they didn't innovate the way we do. Their tool design stayed relatively stable for hundreds of thousands of years. They perfected techniques rather than inventing new ones. They were masters of their world, but they didn't constantly try to change it. You watch the scarred male test the balance of his spear and you wonder, is that a limitation or a different kind of wisdom? Is constant innovation always better? Or is there value in perfecting what works, in living in harmony with the world as it is rather than always trying to reshape it? The weather turns that evening. You can feel it in the air, a pressure change, a shift in the wind. The Neanderthals feel it too. They move with increased urgency, bringing in extra firewood, checking the cave entrance, securing their tools and supplies. By nightfall, the storm hits. Wind howls across the landscape, driving snow horizontally, turning the world beyond the cave into a white void. The temperature plummets. Even inside the cave, even near the fire, you're colder than you've ever been in your life. The Neanderthals huddle together, sharing body heat. The children are in the centre, surrounded by adults. The old woman wraps herself in furs that look ancient, worn soft by years of use. Everyone is conserving energy, moving as little as possible. You try to stay near the fire, but the cold finds you anyway. It seeps through your clothes, through your skin, into your core. Your teeth chatter, your fingers go numb. You pull your knees to your chest and wrap your arms around yourself, but it's not enough. It's never enough. And then you feel it. Warmth. The young woman, the one who's been watching you with cautious curiosity, has moved closer. She's brought an extra fur and she drapes it over your shoulders. She doesn't look at you, doesn't acknowledge what she's done, but she's close enough now that you can feel the heat radiating from her body. It's a small gesture. Practical, maybe, rather than compassionate. One more body near the fire means one more source of heat for everyone, but it's also a choice. She could have let you freeze. She didn't. The storm rages for 2 days. 2 days of howling wind and driving snow, of cold so intense it feels like a physical presence, a predator stalking just beyond the firelight. 2 days of rationing food, of keeping the fire going, of waiting, and you realize this is what killed them. Not any single thing, but the accumulation of challenges, the cold, the scarcity, the energy required just to survive each day. The Neanderthals were built for the Ice Age, adapted to it in ways we never were. But even they were living on the edge, one bad winter away from starvation, one failed hunt away from disaster. They were tough, incredibly tough. But toughness alone isn't always enough. When the storm finally breaks, the world is transformed. Snow covers everything, deep and pristine and deadly. The Neanderthals emerge from the cave slowly, assessing. You can see the calculation in their eyes. How long can we survive on stored food? When can we hunt again? What are the risks? They decide to wait another day. Let the snow settle. Let the animals emerge. Conserve energy. But the children are restless. The boy, especially, is full of pent-up energy from 2 days of confinement. He ventures out into the snow and the girl follows. You watch them play, if that's the right word. They're wrestling, throwing snow, testing their strength against each other. But it's not frivolous. Even in play, they're learning, building muscle, developing coordination, establishing hierarchy. The boy is stronger, but the girl is quicker. She dodges his charges, strikes from unexpected angles, uses his momentum against him. When he finally pins her, she doesn't struggle. She goes still, acknowledging his dominance, and he releases her immediately, the point made. You think about modern children, about playgrounds and video games and structured activities, about how much of childhood we've made safe, controlled, separate from the real stakes of survival. These Neanderthal children are playing, yes, but they're also training for a life where strength, speed, and the ability to read social dynamics might mean the difference between life and death. There's no room for weakness here, no safety net, no second chances, and yet there's also tenderness. When the girl falls and cuts her hand on a hidden rock, the boy immediately stops. He calls for his mother, his voice urgent. The young woman comes running, examines the wound, cleans it with snow, and wraps it with a strip of leather. She holds the girl close for a moment, and you see something in her face that transcends time and species. A mother's concern for her child. They loved. That's what the archaeological evidence tells us. Neanderthals cared for their injured and elderly. We found skeletons with healed fractures that would have required months of care. Individuals who survived despite disabilities that would have made them unable to contribute to the group's survival. Someone fed them. Someone protected them. Someone chose compassion over pragmatism. They buried their dead, sometimes with grave goods, tools, flowers, ochre. They mourned. They remembered. They were human in all the ways that matter most. On the 6th day, you're finally allowed to participate in something meaningful. The females are processing hides, scraping, stretching, treating them with a mixture of brain matter and fat that will keep the leather supple. It's grueling work, repetitive and physically demanding. But it's also essential. Without properly treated hides, there's no protection from the cold, no survival. The young woman shows you what to do. She doesn't speak, you still don't share a language, but her demonstrations are clear. Hold the scraper at this angle, use long, even strokes. Don't tear the hide. Be patient, you try. Your first attempts are clumsy, inefficient. The scraper slips. You use too much pressure, then too little. The young woman watches, and you can see her frustration. But she doesn't give up on you. She takes your hands, positions them correctly, guides your movements until you start to get the rhythm. It takes hours. Your arms ache. Your back screams. Your hands blister. But slowly, gradually, you begin to understand. There's a feel to it, a feedback between tool and material that you have to learn through your body, not your mind. You can't think your way through this. You have to sense it, respond to it. Let your hands learn what your brain can't articulate. And when you finally produce a section of hide that meets the young woman's standards, she nods. Just once. But it's enough. You've contributed something. For the first time since you arrived, you've added value rather than just consuming resources. You're still slow, still clumsy, still barely competent, but you're learning. And maybe that's the key difference between Neanderthals and modern humans. Not intelligence. They were plenty intelligent. Not strength or toughness. They had us beat on both counts. But adaptability, flexibility, the ability to learn new skills quickly, to improvise, to apply knowledge from one domain to another. Neanderthals were specialists. They knew their environment intimately, understood it at a level we can barely imagine. But when that environment changed, when the climate shifted, when new competitors arrived, when the old ways stopped working, they couldn't adapt fast enough. We were generalists, jack of all trades, master of none. We weren't the best at anything, but we were good enough at everything, and when the world changed, we changed with it. That's not superiority. It's just a different strategy. And in the long run, in a world that was changing faster than ever before, our strategy happened to work better, but it could easily have gone the other way. That night something shifts in the group's dynamic. The scarred male and another man have a confrontation. You don't know what it's about, but the tension is palpable. They face each other across the fire, bodies tense, eyes locked. For a moment you think they're going to fight. But the old woman intervenes. She steps between them, places a hand on each man's chest and speaks. Her voice is low, firm, authoritative. Both men listen, and after a long moment the scarred male steps back. The confrontation is over. You've just witnessed something important: conflict resolution, social regulation, the enforcement of group norms. Neanderthals lived in small, tight-knit groups, probably extended family units of 20 to 30 individuals. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone depended on everyone. In that context, uncontrolled conflict could be catastrophic, so they must have had ways of managing tension, of preventing disputes from escalating, of maintaining group cohesion. We don't know exactly what those mechanisms were, but we can infer from the evidence they lived together successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. They cooperated on complex tasks. They cared for their vulnerable. They didn't have the kind of large-scale warfare that characterizes much of human history. Maybe their social groups were too small for that. Maybe their cognitive style, more concrete, more immediate, more focused on the here and now, made it harder to conceptualize abstract enemies or distant threats. Maybe they simply didn't have the population density that creates competition for resources, or maybe they were just better at getting along than we are. You watch the scarred male settle back into his place by the fire, and you wonder what the argument was about. Resources, status, a woman, or something you couldn't possibly understand, some social nuance that's invisible to an outsider. You'll never know, and that's part of what makes them so alien, even as they're so familiar. You can see the humanity in them, the emotions, the relationships, the social complexity, but you can't fully access it. You're separated not just by time, but by fundamental differences in how you process the world. The seventh day brings a discovery that changes everything. The children find it first, a cave painting hidden in a deep recess that you hadn't noticed before. They call the adults, excited, and everyone gathers to look. It's not elaborate, not like the famous cave paintings of Lascaux or Altamira, created by your own ancestors. It's simpler. Handprints in red ochre, a few abstract lines, what might be the outline of an animal, but it's deliberate, intentional. Art, or is it? That's the question that's haunted archaeologists for decades. We found evidence of Neanderthal symbolic behaviour, ochre use, shell beads, possible cave markings. But it's sparse, ambiguous, open to interpretation. Did they have art in the way we understand it? Did they have religion, mythology, abstract thought? Or was their symbolism more pragmatic, more tied to immediate social functions? Markers of identity, perhaps, territorial claims, practical communication rather than aesthetic expression. You watch the Neanderthals examine the painting and you can't read their reactions. Are they reverent, curious, indifferent? The old woman touches one of the handprints, and her hand fits perfectly. Is she remembering who made it? Is it her own mark from years ago? Or is she simply checking the texture, the composition, the technique? The ambiguity is maddening and revealing. Because here's what we know. Neanderthals had the capacity for symbolic thought. They had culture. They had traditions passed down through generations. But their symbolic world seems to have been smaller, more constrained, less elaborate than ours. We don't know why. Maybe their cognitive style was different, more concrete, less abstract. Maybe their social groups were too small to support the kind of cultural accumulation that leads to elaborate art and mythology. Maybe they simply had different priorities, different ways of finding meaning. Or maybe we're just not looking in the right places. Maybe their art was ephemeral, body painting, sand drawings, wooden carvings that didn't survive. Maybe their mythology was oral, their religion experiential, their symbolism tied to practices we can't detect in the archaeological record. We're trying to understand them through the fragments they left behind. But fragments can be misleading. They can make the absent seem non-existent, the different seem deficient. You look at the handprints on the cave wall and you think, someone stood here. Someone pressed their hand against the stone and left their mark. Someone wanted to be remembered, or to remember, or to claim this space as their own. Someone was here. and that someone was human. By the 8th day, you've developed a routine. You're still the weakest member of the group, still the least competent, still the outsider. But you have a role now. You help with the hides. You tend the fire. You watch the children when the adults are busy. You're useful in small ways. And you're learning. Not just skills, but a different way of being in the world. The Neanderthals don't plan the way you do. They don't talk about the future, don't make elaborate strategies, don't worry about abstract possibilities. They respond to what's in front of them, drawing on deep wells of experience and instinct. They're present in a way you've never been, fully engaged with the immediate reality of their lives. It's not that they can't think ahead, they clearly can. The multi-step tool-making proves that. The food storage proves that. The seasonal movements prove that. But their planning seems more concrete, more tied to specific situations and familiar patterns. They know that winter is coming because they can feel it in the air, see it in the behavior of animals, recognize the signs from countless previous years. They prepare because preparation is what you do when those signs appear, not because they're anxiously projecting into an uncertain future. There's a kind of peace in that, a groundedness. They're not haunted by regret or anxiety the way you are. They're not constantly second-guessing themselves, imagining alternative scenarios, worrying about things that might never happen. They're just here, now, alive in this moment. And you realize that's what you've lost. That's the price of your abstract reasoning, your ability to imagine distant futures and alternative realities. You're never fully present. You're always somewhere else, in the past, in the future, in hypothetical worlds that don't exist. The Neanderthals don't have that problem. Or maybe it's not a problem at all. Maybe it's a gift. On the 9th day, disaster strikes. The young woman, the one who shared her fur with you during the storm, who taught you to scrape hides, doesn't return from a gathering expedition. The group waits as the sun sets, growing increasingly agitated. When full darkness falls and she's still not back, the scarred male and 2 others take torches and go searching. You wait by the fire with the old woman and the children. The girl is crying, quiet, controlled, but unmistakably distressed. The boy sits rigid, his small face set in an expression of forced stoicism. The old woman holds them both, rocking slightly, making low sounds that might be comfort or might be grief. Hours pass. And then, finally, you hear voices. The searchers return, and they're carrying her. She's alive, but injured. Her leg is badly twisted, possibly broken. She must have fallen, slipped on ice or loose rock. They lay her near the fire, and the old woman immediately takes charge. She examines the leg with careful, experienced hands. Then she does something that stuns you. She sets the bone. It's not gentle. The young woman screams, a sound of pure agony that echoes through the cave. But the old woman doesn't hesitate. She manipulates the leg until the bone is aligned, then splints it with straight branches and binds it tightly with strips of leather. It's field medicine. Practical, effective, brutal, and it works. Over the following days, you watch the group care for her. They bring her food and water, they help her move when necessary. They keep her warm, keep her comfortable, keep her spirits up. The children sit with her, and she tells them stories. You can't understand the words, but you can see the narrative in her gestures, the drama in her expressions. She's not contributing to the group's survival right now. She's consuming resources without producing anything. By pure pragmatic calculation, she's a burden. But no one treats her that way. No one suggests abandoning her. She's family. She's one of them, and they take care of their own. This is what the fossil record shows us. Neanderthals with healed injuries that would have required months of care. Individuals with disabilities who survived to old age. Evidence of compassion, of social bonds strong enough to override pure survival calculus. They weren't savage. They weren't brutish. They were human beings who loved and cared for each other, who made sacrifices for their family members, who valued each other beyond mere utility. And watching them care for the injured woman, you feel something unexpected. Shame. Shame for every time you've thought of them as primitive, as less than. Shame for the casual superiority embedded in phrases like caveman and Neanderthal. Shame for the way your species has claimed the word human as if it belongs only to you. The days blur together after that. 10 days, 12, 2 weeks. You've stopped counting. You're stronger now, leaner. Your hands are calloused. Your muscles adapted to the constant physical demands. You can scrape a hide without supervision. You can maintain a fire. You can read some of the group's nonverbal communication, anticipate their needs, coordinate your actions with theirs. You're still not one of them. You never will be. But you're not completely outside anymore either. You exist in a liminal space, not quite family, not quite stranger, tolerated, accepted in a limited way. And you've learned things that no amount of reading or research could have taught you. You've learned what it feels like to be cold, truly cold, for days on end. You've learned what hunger feels like when there's no guarantee of the next meal. You've learned the weight of constant vigilance, the exhaustion of never being completely safe. You've learned that survival isn't an adventure, it's work. Grinding, relentless, unglamorous work. But you've also learned about the small moments of beauty that exist even in the harshest conditions. The way the firelight dances on the cave walls, the taste of fresh meat after days of hunger, the warmth of bodies huddled together against the cold, the sound of children laughing despite everything. The Neanderthals don't have much. No technology beyond stone and wood and bone, no writing, no agriculture, no permanent settlements, no art galleries or concert halls or libraries. But they have each other. They have their knowledge, passed down through countless generations. They have their strength and their skills and their deep, intuitive understanding of the world they inhabit. And they have something else, something harder to define, a kind of integrity, a wholeness. They are what they are, fully and completely, without pretense or self-consciousness. They don't question their place in the world. They don't agonize over meaning or purpose. They simply live as fully and competently as they can in the world they were born into. There's a dignity in that, a kind of grace. You can't stay forever. This is a thought experiment, an imaginative exercise. Eventually you'll return to your own time, your own world, your own species. But before you go, you want to understand one more thing. Why did they disappear? The question has haunted anthropologists for decades. The Neanderthals were successful for hundreds of thousands of years. They survived ice ages, climate fluctuations, megafauna extinctions. They were tough, smart, well adapted to their environment. And then, relatively suddenly in evolutionary terms, they were gone. The last known Neanderthals died out around 40,000 years ago, just a few thousand years after modern humans arrived in Europe. What happened? The simple answer, the one that dominated thinking for decades, was that we outcompeted them. We were smarter, more innovative, better at language and abstract thought. We had superior technology and social organization. We were the better species, and we won. But the reality is almost certainly more complex and more tragic. Climate change played a role. The period when Neanderthals went extinct was one of rapid environmental fluctuation. The world they'd adapted to over hundreds of thousands of years was changing faster than they could keep up. Their specialized knowledge, their deep familiarity with specific landscapes and ecosystems became less valuable when those landscapes and ecosystems were in flux. Population dynamics mattered too. Neanderthals seem to have lived in small, isolated groups. Their total population was probably never very large. Maybe a few tens of thousands across all of Europe and Asia. That made them vulnerable to random fluctuations, to local extinctions that couldn't be replenished by immigration from other areas. And then we arrived. Modern humans spreading out of Africa, moving into territories the Neanderthals had occupied for millennia. We didn't necessarily kill them, though there may have been some violence, some direct competition. But we didn't have to kill them to doom them. We just had to be slightly better at exploiting the same resources, slightly more flexible in our strategies, slightly more efficient in our hunting, slightly better at adapting to changing conditions. In a world of abundance, there might have been room for both species, but in the harsh, marginal environments of Ice Age Europe, even small advantages compound over time. Even a slightly lower birth rate, a slightly higher infant mortality, a slightly reduced hunting success. Over generations, over millennia, these small differences add up. And there's another factor, one that's both beautiful and heartbreaking. They interbred with us. When modern humans and Neanderthals met, they didn't just compete. They also mated. They created children together, children who carried genes from both lineages. Those hybrid children were absorbed into modern human populations. The Neanderthal genes were diluted generation by generation until there were no pure Neanderthals left. Just humans with varying amounts of Neanderthal ancestry. It wasn't genocide. It wasn't even really competition in the traditional sense. It was absorption, assimilation, a slow genetic blending that erased the Neanderthals as a distinct species while preserving fragments of them in us. Is that extinction, or is it transformation? On your last night in the cave, you sit by the fire and watch the Neanderthals go about their evening routines. The children are playing a game with small stones, their rules incomprehensible, but clearly meaningful to them. The old woman is working on a piece of leather, her hands moving with the confidence of decades of practice. The scarred male is sharpening a spear point, testing the edge with his thumb. The injured young woman is sitting up now, her leg still splintered but healing. She catches your eye and smiles. A small, brief expression, but unmistakable. Recognition. Maybe even something like friendship. And you think, this is what we lost when they disappeared. Not just a species, but a way of being. Human. A different path. A different possibility. They were stronger than us. Tougher. More resilient in many ways. They had knowledge we'll never recover, skills we'll never match. They were adapted to their world in ways we never were, never needed to be. But adaptation is a double-edged sword. The more specialized you become, the more vulnerable you are to change. And the world was changing. We were the generalists, the adaptable ones, the ones who could survive anywhere, do anything, learn any skill. We weren't the best at anything, but we were good enough at everything. And in a changing world, good enough at everything beats excellent at one thing. But there's a cost to that flexibility. We lost the deep, intuitive connection to place that the Neanderthals had. We lost the stability of living the same way for hundreds of thousands of years. We lost the peace of knowing exactly who we are and where we belong. We gained the whole world, but we lost our home. The fire burns low. The cave grows quiet. One by one, the Neanderthals settle into sleep, their breathing slow and steady, their bodies relaxed in a way yours never quite manages. You lie awake, thinking about everything you've seen, everything you've learned, and you realize the question isn't really whether you could survive 24 hours with a Neanderthal family. You could, barely, with their help and tolerance. The real question is whether they could have survived in your world. And the answer is almost certainly no, not because they weren't smart enough or strong enough, but because your world moves too fast, changes too quickly, demands too much flexibility and abstraction. They were built for stability, for deep knowledge of a specific place and way of life. Your world has no place for that kind of specialization. You've built a civilization that rewards novelty over mastery, breadth over depth, constant change over stability. You've created a world that would be as alien and hostile to them as their world is to you. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that they went extinct, but that there's no place for them anymore. No place for their way of being, their kind of intelligence, their deep, patient, embodied knowledge. The world belongs to the generalists now, to the flexible, the adaptable, the the ones who can learn new skills quickly and discard old ones without regret, to the ones who are comfortable with constant change, with abstraction, with living in their heads rather than their bodies. That's you. That's us. That's what we've become. And it's worked, in a sense. We've spread across the entire planet. We've built cities and civilizations. We've created art and science and technology beyond anything the Neanderthals could have imagined. But we've also created a world where we're increasingly disconnected from the physical reality of our existence, where we don't know where our food comes from or how to make the things we use, where we're anxious and depressed and alienated despite, or perhaps because of, all our abstract knowledge and technological sophistication. The Neanderthals didn't have those problems. They knew exactly where they fit in the world. They had skills that were immediately, obviously useful. They had tight social bonds and clear roles and a deep sense of belonging. They had what we were all searching for, a sense of home. As dawn breaks on what you know will be your last day, you step outside the cave. The sun is rising over the frozen landscape, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe, but it's also crystalline, pure, alive in a way that air in your time never is. You think about the Neanderthals sleeping in the cave behind you. You think about all the Neanderthals who lived and died in places like this, across hundreds of thousands of years. You think about the children they raised, the knowledge they passed down, the lives they lived with courage and competence and quiet dignity. And you think about the fact that they're gone. Not completely. They live on in fragments, in the DNA of billions of people, in the archaeological record, in our growing understanding of what it means to be human. But as a distinct people, as a living culture, as a way of being in the world, they're gone. The world moved on without them, and it will move on without us too, eventually. That's the nature of evolution, of history, of time itself. Nothing lasts forever. Every species, every culture, every way of life eventually gives way to something else. The Neanderthals had their moment, a long moment, far longer than modern humans have had so far, and then it passed. We're having our moment now, and someday, sooner or later, it will pass too. The question is, what will we leave behind? What fragments of us will survive in whatever comes next? What will future beings, human or otherwise, make of the traces we leave in the earth? Will they see us as we see the Neanderthals, as a fascinating but ultimately failed experiment, as a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-specialization, or in our case perhaps the dangers of too much abstraction, too much disconnection from physical reality? Or will they see us as we're trying to see the Neanderthals now, as fully human in our own way, as people who did the best we could with what we had, as beings worthy of respect and understanding, not just clinical analysis? You turn back to the cave, and the scarred male is standing there watching you. He's been watching you this whole time, you realize, assessing, deciding. He walks toward you, and for a moment you tense, uncertain, but he's not threatening. He stops a few feet away and looks at you, really looks at you, with an intensity that's almost uncomfortable. Then he does something unexpected. He reaches out and touches your forehead, gently, with 2 fingers. It's a gesture you've seen him make with the children, with the other adults. A gesture of what? Blessing? Acknowledgement? Farewell? You don't know. You'll never know. But you understand in a way that goes deeper than language that he's telling you something. Maybe you're not one of us, but you're not nothing either. Maybe you tried. You survived. That counts for something. Maybe. Go back to your world now. You don't belong here, but you were here, and that matters. He turns and walks back into the cave, and you know you won't see him again. Won't see any of them again. This moment, this experience, this glimpse into a lost world, it's over. You close your eyes, and when you open them, You're back in your own time, your own world, your own species. But you're not the same. You can't be. You've seen them now. Not as abstractions, not as museum displays, not as footnotes in the story of human evolution, but as people, real people, with their own intelligence and dignity and humanity. And you carry that with you. In your memory, yes, but also in your DNA, if you're of European or Asian descent, in the literal physical substance of your being. You are part Neanderthal. Not much, maybe 2%, maybe 3%, but it's there. In your immune system, helping you fight off diseases. In your skin, helping you adapt to different climates. In your brain, influencing how you think and feel in ways we're only beginning to understand. They're not gone, not completely. They're here, in you, in billions of people around the world. They're part of the human story, part of what made us what we are. And maybe that's the real answer to why you wouldn't last 24 hours in a Neanderthal family. Not because you're weaker or less intelligent, but because you're different. You're the product of a different evolutionary path, a different set of adaptations, a different way of being human. You're a hybrid, a mixture, a being that carries genes and traits from multiple lineages, multiple ways of being, multiple experiments in what it means to be human. And that's not a weakness, it's a strength. It's what allowed your ancestors to survive when the Neanderthals didn't. It's what allows you to adapt, to change, to thrive in a world that's constantly shifting beneath your feet. But it's also a loss, because in becoming this hybrid, this flexible, adaptable generalist, you lost something the Neanderthals had. That deep connection to place, that embodied knowledge, that sense of belonging. You can't go back. The world the Neanderthals lived in is gone, and it's not coming back. But you can remember. You can honour what they were, what they gave us, what they represent. You can remember that humanity is not one thing, but many things. That there are multiple ways to be intelligent, multiple ways to be successful, multiple ways to be human. You can remember that the path we're on, the path of constant innovation, constant change, constant abstraction, is not the only path. It's just the one we happen to take. And it's not necessarily better, just different. You can remember that we're all hybrids, all mixtures, all carrying the legacy of multiple lineages and multiple ways of being. And you can remember them, the Neanderthals, the people who lived and loved and struggled and survived for hundreds of thousands of years in a world we can barely imagine. The people who are gone but not gone, extinct but not extinct, lost but still here in fragments, in traces, in the very substance of who we are. They're part of us, and we're part of them. And the story continues.